Thank you for joining us today. My name is Srilata Sircar. I am a lecturer in India and Global Affairs at the King's India Institute and also the convener of the Confronting Caste series. This is the second in a series of events that we are organizing over the course of this academic year. The aim behind the series is to expand the scope of critical engagement with caste as a structure of social power in both historical and contemporary perspectives. This term, we have three exciting panel events that are taking place every alternate Thursday, and today is the second of these three events. We are also releasing a companion piece to the seminars in the form of a podcast in which I speak to researchers from various disciplines and geographies about their work on the everyday operations of caste power in different social contexts. Please do keep an eye on the King's India Institute website and social media handles to know more about these events and releases. You are also very welcome to contact Vignesh Rajahmani, who is a doctoral candidate at the Institute and the coordinator of the Confronting Caste series. For today's panel, we have an exciting lineup of speakers. We have with us Jusmeet Sihra, who is pursuing a joint doctoral program at the Sciences Po in Paris and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's going to be speaking on the everyday practices of getting respect among ex-untouchable groups in Rajasthan. Welcome, Jusmeet. We are very happy to have you.
Thank you.
We also have with us Shireen Azam, who is a doctoral candidate at the University of Oxford. She's also the founder of the digital initiative EPW Engage at the journal Economic and Political Weekly, which I'm sure many of our listeners are well acquainted with. Today, Shireen will be speaking on Islamic egalitarianism and the dual denial of caste in Indian Muslims. Welcome, Shireen. Thank you for joining us. And finally, we have with us Professor Rupa Viswanath, who is Professor of Indian Religions at the Center for Modern Indian Studies at the University of Göttingen, as well as a fellow of the Lucy Cavendish College at the University of Cambridge. Many of us might be acquainted with her 2014 book titled The Pariah Problem, Caste, Religion, and the Social in Modern India. Today, Professor Viswanath will speak on conversion into and out of caste and the role of the colonial and post-colonial states in Hinduizing India's Dalits. Welcome, Rupa. We're very happy to have you, and thank you for joining us. Chairing the session today is Dr. Kriti Kapila, who is a social anthropologist of law based here at the King's India Institute. She's also the academic director of the International School of Government. Kriti's new book, titled Nullius, The Anthropology of Ownership, Sovereignty, and the Law in India, will be out early next year with the University of Chicago Press, and we can't wait for it. Thank you, Kriti. I will now give the word to you to introduce today's topic and get the panel started.
Am I audible? Yes. Thank you, Srilata, and welcome to our speakers. It's a very exciting lineup of panelists. Where today we're going to be discussing caste, confronting caste in faith and religion and across society. Now, of late, the experience of ritual hierarchy has found global homonyms. Notably, or of late, Isabel Wilkerson has called her book on race in America caste. This homonymic experience of caste and race has a long history, as we know, in South Asia, but it also has had a more recent life, which has been enabled by the political affordances of globalization, as seen in the Durban Conference. At the close of the last century. I have called this a homonymic relationship because it often experiences look like each other, but when you explore deeper or investigate their structures, important and even categorical divergences appear. So how then do we confront caste? Confronting caste in context, it is, in context, it is not usually called out for what it is, or then is missing from discussion, is an important intervention taken up by the series that Srilata has created. And in today's discussion, the panel does precisely that. It calls out the dual meaning of even homonym, i.e. calls it out for where it's missing and actually gives you different ideas or different formations of caste in other places. So, they address questions. So in today's discussion, the panel does, addresses questions not just of recognition, misrecognition, or even non-recognition, but call out the specificities in that caste itself is not monolithic in its structuration, politicization, or indeed articulation with things like religion or the state. Our panelists ask, is caste Hindu? Can it be Islamic? Can any part of the pluriverse of Indian society be casteless? Why don't some regions give us Dalit party politics? What can the state response to conversion tell us about not just the secular settlement, but the caste state religion settlement? So without further ado, let's invite our speakers today to help us think through these provocations. I warmly welcome all of you. And so if you don't mind, we have Jusmeet present first and followed by Shireen and then Rupa. And I'll keep the timer, and I will try not to be rude around 15 minutes. Okay, Jusmeet.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kriti. Let me just share my screen. So thank you very much once again, Kriti and Srilata, for this introduction. And most of all, for inviting me today to King's College, even though virtually, for this talk. So let me just start with my presentation, which I have titled The Everyday Practices of Getting Respect, the Case of Ex-Untouchables in Ulajpur City. So I'm really motivated about this project by the very famous theorization of caste by Ambedkar when he calls caste a graded inequality. And in the same passage, Ambedkar also defines caste as a descending scale of contempt. So what is really at stake for those at the lowest bottom in the caste hierarchy is respect. Because what they have in the caste hierarchy is loads of contempt, right? To seek respect and confront caste, there is a very large literature in caste studies as well as in Dalit studies about sociopolitical movements. One of the recent works that came out is by Amit Ahuja, Mobilizing the Marginalized. And in this, he writes, marginalized mobilize to claim their rightful place by building collective respect through the process of organization. So really, there's a lot of attention to the process of organization to make it a social movement that way. But here follows my empirical puzzle. What happens to those regions and states where there is no Dalit movement or no Dalit political party to voice the claim that the lowest in the caste hierarchy wish to make? One of the states is Rajasthan, another is Madhya Pradesh. And despite the fact that Rajasthan has the highest reported cases of rape against Dalit women or the highest number of atrocities, crimes against the scheduled caste, the Dalits, there is no sign of a Dalit movement or a political party really kicking in. So this brings me to my research question, which is as follows. What are the everyday strategies to gain respect by ex-untouchables, and especially in an environment where there is no Dalit movement? And here I'm also, I must acknowledge that I'm inspired by the seminal work of Michel Lamont and colleagues, Getting Respect, Responding to Stigma and Discrimination in the United States, Brazil, and Israel. So it's very much, it's worthwhile to engage with a similar question, although the research design that I have and Lamo and colleagues had is very, very different. So my case study is the city of Ulajpur in Rajasthan. So Ulajpur is a pseudonym that I use to anonymize the identities of my research interlocutors. And I specifically use an urban environment to test this question because city is or has been considered a panacea for caste ills for long, including by Dr. B. Ambedkar. Moreover, Ulajpur has about 25% of the population composed of the scheduled castes, when the national urban average is around 16%. And there is also a wide panorama of ex-untouchable castes in the city, which makes it extremely exciting for a researcher to understand and compare those differences and those very, very different cosmos that each caste sort of occupies. So I have done 6 rounds of field work, and it's the data that is coming from my PhD project, which is on spatial segregation of ex-untouchable castes. So I've done 6 rounds of field work between 2016 and 19, using mostly participant observation as well as interviews. So I want to just have a word about nomenclature here. I have deliberately made a choice to refer to Dalits as ex-untouchables, and it is for 2 reasons. Firstly, Dalit is not really a word which is used often and frequently in Rajasthan. Secondly, I ended up offending some of my research interlocutors by using the word Dalit, because they just did not align with it, and they did not consider themselves as Dalit. So respecting those choices, I decided that I'm going to use the word ex-untouchable. And here I mean those groups that have suffered untouchability. Sometimes the word Dalit will slip out of my mouth, but I want to make it clear that it is not suffused with the political meaning that the word Dalit has, but referring really to the ex-untouchable groups. So the main argument that I'm going to make in the presentation is as follows. There are basically 3 large packets of strategies that are used by the ex-untouchable groups to make claims of respect. Upward economic mobility, engaging in electoral politics, both local as well as state level, at the level of Rajasthan Legislative Assembly, and cultural. So the strategies that ex-untouchables use may be group or individual driven, but they are necessarily directed towards a group claim. And I think this is very important to note. And so in that sense, it's a kind of a meso level that we are discussing here. Today in the presentation, I'm going to focus mostly on the cultural packet of strategies. All right, so switching to my empirical data, when you are within a ghetto, within a caste ghetto, and with that I mean a homogeneous caste, well, a spatially segregated zone inhabited primarily by 1 or 2 or 3 caste groups at the most, but having a very strong sense of sort of clustering, right? So when you are living in a ghetto and most of the residents there are poor, one of the most important forms of seeking respect is by making sacrificial offerings to the Kul Devi. And this is a mean of cultural membership of the caste when you are living in that sort of a zone. It could be for a variety of reasons: fulfilling a wish, saving oneself from the wrath of a goddess, seek health, etc. Right? So let me give you an example from the caste Koli, traditionally associated with weaving occupation. So here it was the sacrificial offering of 2 goats, their livers and blood to the goddess Kali. But when these kinds of rituals happen, there are also other goddesses, for instance, Nagarkot and Jwala, that are also invoked at the same time. And this is a very, an important time for those who engage this ritual, who engage with this ritual gathering. I mean, who organizes it, at whose house it is going to happen, and to those who participate in it, right? This is another example from the caste Kanjar. It's an ex-criminal tribe and right now associated mostly with making traditional moonshine liquor, the illicit liquor, right? So here there are 2 sheep sacrificed to the local goddesses in the same way. And these are 2 very, very different castes, but really what brings together in terms of bringing respect is the sacrificial offering that and it is happening across castes I know Valmikis do it, Regars do it, and so on. The second group of strategies that the ex-untouchables use would be largely informed by the concept of Sanskritization. So it is very much in vogue, at least in the field that I am studying. So M.N. Srinivas coined the term Sanskritization, as we all know, and he defines it, he writes, a low caste was able in a generation or two to rise to a higher position in the hierarchy by adopting vegetarianism and teetotalism and by Sanskritizing its ritual and pantheon. However thoroughgoing the Sanskritization of an untouchable group may be, it is unable to cross the barrier of untouchability. The fact that Sanskritization does not help the untouchables to move up does not, however, make Sanskritization any the less popular. So I think to a certain degree, the ex-untouchables are aware of what Srinivas writes, that they're not going to make it to a higher status. But yet they continue to engage in the Sanskritization practices that I'm going to elaborate on in a second. In Ulajpur, it is happening around 3 lines. The first one is having the mythological narratives of Kshatriya origin. And if you look at Christophe Jaffrelot's book, A Silent Revolution, you would see similar practices going on with the so-called the other backward classes, for instance, Yadavs and Kayasts even. Secondly, the ex-untouchables adopt mainstream Vaishnavite pantheon. And there's a fascinating chapter in Susan Bailey's book about this. And thirdly, Hindutva, again, one can refer to A Silent Revolution about it. So let me discuss the first one first, the mythological origins. So almost all of the ex-untouchable groups I'm working with, Koli, Nayaks, Regar and Megwal are associated with leatherworking, Valmikis are scavengers, and Sasis and Kanjars are the ex-criminal tribes. All of them are engaging with the Kshatriya origin narrative. The dominant ex-untouchable caste, Kolis, in fact, for a long time, continued to keep calling themselves at Koli Rajput or Shakya Koli. This was a strong movement until 1960s, but it was abandoned after affirmative action, jobs and education opportunities started kicking in a larger fashion, right? So here's an example from one of the books, and there are many that I collected over my fieldwork, and it writes Koli Rajputon ka Sankshipt Itihas, a brief history of Koli Rajputs. I was doing this, I was interviewing, and I'm moving to the second strategies of adopting a Vaishnavite pantheon. So I was interviewing in 2016, possibly the richest Dalit in Ulajpur, also politician. And after the interview was over, he invites me if I was interested to see a Dalit Mandir. So I, of course, jumped on the opportunity and I go and visit the Dalit Mandir with him. And that's how the Dalit Mandir looked like. Radha and Krishna adorned in very expensive clothing and a lot of silver. I visited this person's house several times later, and what you see is these large posters of Vishnu lying down, not lying down, resting, a resting pose, or a scene from the Mahabharata of Krishna riding the chariot and Arjun behind him. And you can see the size also of the posters, right? So these were photographs that I had taken from the Janmashtami celebration in 2018. And this is possibly, if not the most extravagant, one of the most extravagant celebrations of Janmashtami, the birth of Krishna in Ulajpur. And all of the people that you see in these photographs are Dalits from either the Koli caste, mostly, and some of them are also from Berwa caste who are participating in this activity. So it's really a big scale celebration. Sanskritization is also, so far I was referring more to group practices, but here's an example of an individual engaging in Sanskritization. So he's also a Koli grade B officer. So this is the scale of the government jobs in India, right? Grade B and A, the highest. So he's working in the life insurance company, and he lives in a mixed neighborhood. So he moved out from the ghetto and he started living in a mixed neighborhood. So he tells me, तुम जितना पंडिताई से रहते हो, उससे ज्यादा हम पंडिताई से रहते हैं. We stay in a more Brahminical way than you, referring to his upper caste neighbors. We have completely given up eating non-vegetarian food from 2008 onwards. Nagarkot and Jwalaji in Himachal are our Kul Devis. You have to sacrifice a male goat to them. So he uses the word we, referring to not only his family, but to his caste. And then he refers to the sacrifice that he has made to sort of, about this important cultural practices of sacrificing a male goat. He further argues, you won't find as many religious texts in the house of a Brahmin that you may in my house here. Gita, Ramayan, Bhaktmal's text. And he shows me the books in his living room. There is this big suitcase filled with Purans. They're not just sitting in the house somewhere. My wife reads a chapter daily from it. So I did triangulate that information. The wife does get up at 4 a.m. every morning, and she does engage in the part from one of these books that she picks up every morning. In fact, Kolis went even a step further. They are the only ex-untouchable caste in Ulhajpur, which in fact have their own pandits, their priests that are doing Brahminical rituals in Sanskrit. Lastly, I will draw your attention to Hindutva. And it's really the idea that forget your caste, become a Hindu, right? And Christoph really discusses in great detail in his book. So the current Koli MLA is really a product of Hindutva. Yes, Kriti.
Your time is up, actually. So if you can wrap it up.
Okay, so I'm going to head towards the conclusion very soon. So she's a product of Hindutva. She was in fact working in the RSS women wing and taught at Seva Bharati school before being picked up by the local politicians. She has been a BJP MLA for 4 terms. So it also shows that, engaging in Hindutva as an ex-untouchable may have benefits, material benefits. Less represented ex-untouchable castes are also turning towards it, and especially those who are not happy with the way Congress deals with them, right? There are 2 examples in my mind, Valmikis and Jatavs. So this is just a photograph of one of the Hindutva processions that happened in the Koli ghetto I was working in. Let me just skip these slides and wrap up my presentation, and we can sort of, I can discuss in the Q&A. So to conclude, in the absence of an anti-caste Dalit movement, Dalit castes in Ulhajpur are far from being without agency. The most important weapon that they have at their disposal is pragmatism in seeking respect. So they use everyday cultural, political, and upward mobility strategies according to their caste, class, as well as residential location. And the idea is really to overcome the low caste stigma. And in this sense, I argue that these are anti-caste strategies. Out of these cultural practices that I have discussed, Sanskritization remains a key approach. But it's not so much to attain social mobility, as Srinivas argues in his famous text, but it's a practice by the socially mobile, right? However, this kind of a pragmatic approach puts the agenda of Dalit unity really in the backseat. So far what is happening is that each caste for itself and each one for himself in the quest of seeking respect. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to engaging more in the Q&A round.
Thanks, Jusmeet. And may I now invite Shireen.
Thank you, Kriti, and a big thank you to Srilata and Vignesh for organizing this so smoothly. I'll just share my screen. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay. Second. I'm going to be speaking about the concept of Islamic egalitarianism and what I call the dual denial of caste in Indian Muslims. So let me just begin by saying that caste among Muslims is perhaps one of the biggest mysteries of India. And it's not a mystery because we don't know much about it. We actually do. But somehow, because somehow it just doesn't seem to register. For a community that is constantly spoken of, scrutinized, attacked, and even defended, it seems that there's just one thing about Indian Muslims that no one wants to talk about, and that's caste. If I were to accumulate and go through every prominent book written on communalism and secularism, it's highly likely that I'll completely miss the fact that most Indian Muslims also belong to backward castes. Instead, most often Muslim lives are looked at through the lenses of religious politics alone. But why does this happen? It's not that caste among Muslims is not acknowledged in literature at all. In fact, it's something that's been periodically noted by historians, by policymakers, by anthropologists. So from colonial government records of 19th century to the censuses, of course, colonial censuses, to later in post-independence India, where scholars.
Shireen, sorry, we're losing you. We've now completely lost you.
Many others, Ali Anwar has written a very important book on this. And Khalid Ansari has been theorizing extensively on the symbiotic relationship of upper caste Muslim elite and secular politics. So there's enough data and scholarship among Muslims, and it's been constantly made available in prominent public forums. But despite the evidence, somehow, the concept of caste among Muslims does not stick in academia, media, or political discourse. There is something very interesting in the way in which evidence of caste is done away with, which is what I want to look at today. So, as the title says, caste is not invisible, it is invisibilized, and my work is studying the discourses through which this happens, through which caste is invisibilized in Muslims. And in my larger work, I look at discourses of the state and Muslim elite coming together to create this. And the two broad ways in which this happens is one, conceptual omissions, through which caste is undermined in Muslim lives. And the second is numerical omissions, through which the percentage of lower caste Muslims in India is undermined. In this presentation, I look at a few examples of how caste gets acknowledged and denied at the same time in the same document written by the same people. And this happens through the concept of Islamic egalitarianism. Now, just to zoom out a little bit, we all know that denial about caste is not new or specific to Muslims. It is what independent India is built on. The end of last century especially has seen a lot of Dalit writing, lower caste writing, challenging how the story of India and independent India has been written. And they've showed us that the concept of caste has been systematically undermined by whitewashing with the concept of class, or by romanticizing upper caste culture as some kind of post-colonial consciousness against modernity. So performative castelessness is a very useful category to understand the foundations of the caste-blind Indian state, where privileged upper castes have been encouraged to think of themselves as casteless while being at the helm of public and private offices. And this is exactly how caste-based census was discontinued almost immediately after independence for all castes except scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. And this is also the reason why we don't have accurate estimates of the number of lower caste OBC Muslims, or rather any OBCs for that matter. So the undermining of caste as a category to understand Indians has been in place across religions and definitely for Hindus as well. However, there's something very unique in the way it takes place in Muslims, where a dual denial of caste is in operation. So there is the first level of denial, which is the castelessness of the post-colonial state and the intelligentsia, and then the second, which is the state and the Muslim elites' denial of caste in Islam specifically. A key form in which caste is invisibilized among Muslims, and I wish to emphasize on, is by treating caste as something extra to Muslim lives. In the introduction to his 1973 book, Imtiaz Ahmad says that when scholars are confronted with evidence of caste in Muslims, they tend to use different terms to call it. So many stick to words like biradri or zats. Some even call it caste-like, but just stop short of calling it caste. I'll produce one of the examples below. This is by Parvez Nasir from 1993 from Economic and Political Weekly. He says, it is necessary to make a distinction between a caste system and caste labels. And he says later on, I've not quoted this here, but Muslims have caste labels and Hindus have a caste system. So he describes caste system as the former refers to a local system of hierarchically ordered corporate groupings involving a division of labor, occupational specialization, unequal dependence, and recruitment by birth only. Now let's see how it defines caste labels. The latter refers to a set of non-local, non-corporate name groups which provide a ranking hierarchy and which do not involve occupational specialization, unequal dependence, and recruitment by birth only. We know now that this is not true. Among several other works, Sachar Committee report has also said in no uncertain terms that all features of caste system in Hindus are present in Indian Muslims, and this very well includes occupational specialization as well as endogamy and hierarchy, which actually Nazir also admits to. What distinctions like these have done in the long run is they bracket evidences of caste as cultural anomalies, or at best as sociological attributes. This dissuades from inquiries into looking at caste as a structural system which determines access and exclusion of Muslims in this country. So it prohibits us from moving from sociological to the political, to recognize that it's not just that Muslims have caste, but that most Muslims of India are lower caste. This is really, really important. It also restricts us from recognizing what Arshad Alam has put very, very crisply, which is that most Indian Muslims are lower caste, but the people who represent them in political, intellectual, and secular spheres, religious and secular spheres, are upper caste. This denial has very real effects. At the level of academia, it means that Muslims are viewed from religious politics alone, and the suffering of Muslim lives are only seen as the suffering of minorities. Even though backwardness has mostly been closely studied with caste, Muslim backwardness is understood as religious. So Muslims' educational backwardness, their ghettoization, and their absence in public sector jobs is understood through religion alone as an effect of religious conservatism or some kind of effect of being a minority. At the level of policy, this denies recognition of lower caste Muslims and appropriate entitlements for backward castes. So Muslim Dalits don't get SC, they don't get scheduled caste status, they're clubbed under OBC Muslims. Muslim OBCs are undercounted, are underestimated. And in the end, upper caste Muslims end up getting away with saying that caste is a non-issue for Muslims while representing them in all possible forums. Finally, at the level of political discourse, it restricts backward caste Muslims from sufficiently participating in the emancipatory politics of caste and backwardness, which has been made available post-Mandal. Since I think I don't have much time to go, I'm looking at Kriti, but I will...
5 more minutes, you've got plenty of time.
I will quickly try to demonstrate what I've said so far through a couple of examples. Some of these apply to Indian Christians as well, but I will be restricting myself to Muslims alone. I will look at two backward class I will look at the two backward class commission reports. The Mandal, the second is the Mandal report, of course, and the first is the Kalakilaka report. The first one was produced in 1955 and never implemented, and Mandal was produced in 1979. A close reading of these documents suggests a simultaneous acknowledgement and denial of caste among Indian Muslims by the state. It is pertinent to note that the concept of egalitarianism is used to deny the rights to the most marginalized. Let us start with Mandal, which without doubt is one of the best things that has happened for lower caste persons in India, including lower caste Muslims, because it did bring them under the ambit of OBC reservations. So Mandal does this interesting thing where, one, it recognizes caste among Muslims. So it says, there is no doubt that social and educational backwardness among non-Hindu communities is more or less of the same order as among Hindu communities. But then it pauses to say, wait, these are egalitarian religions. So it says, despite the prevalence of caste system among non-Hindu communities in varying degrees, the fact of the matter is that all these religions are totally egalitarian in their outlook. They proclaim absolute equality of their co-religionists. And then it goes on to say, in view of this, caste cannot be made the basis for identifying socially and educationally backward classes among non-Hindu communities. This is a very interesting example of admitting to caste and then pulling up a theoretical concept of egalitarianism to then give a compromised understanding of caste in Muslims. So Mandal also does not suggest Muslim scheduled caste, Muslim that is to get scheduled caste status. It puts them under OBCs, and it underestimates the number of, the percentage of lower caste Muslims. Abu Salah Sharif has written about the latter. And now I look at the first backward class commission quickly. It's actually even more interesting than Mandal because many of us know this, that it was rejected by its own chairman after its publication. So what this report does is, again, acknowledges Muslims. It says, gradually, however, Islamic society in India succumbed to the influence of caste and lost its pristine purity. However, it continues to make references to the egalitarian nature of the official religion. And here Krishanti is mentioned as well. It says, it would be doing a disservice both to Islam and Christianity if we encourage backward individuals following these two faiths to exaggerate their social hardships and claim that they form a distinct social community. The wording here is extremely strange. Sample one more. It says, it is sad that Islam and Christianity in India must admit that they failed in the mission of socially uplifting the backward classes, and that there are sections in the midst that still labor under certain social handicaps. It is remarkable that the commission feels embarrassed that Islam has to admit to caste. How can a religion admit to something or feel embarrassed? It is important to ask who or what is the Islam that the secular state is so reluctant to do this disservice to? Is it the idea of the religion of Islam, or is it the Muslim upper caste who have so far dominated what Islam or what or who Islam is? There are several things happening here at the same time, which we need to unpack. There's a lot of temple noise going in the background. I'm sorry for that. One, the state here shows the inclination to protect the idea of a religion. Am I audible or is it too noisy? It's cool? Okay. So the state here shows the inclination to protect the idea of a religion, or rather the idea of a cohesive minority religion over protecting the most marginalized members of the religious community. Secondly, this castelessness in minority religions is used to overall undermine the effects of caste. As I said earlier, this report is very important because the chairman rejected it in somewhat of a last minute epiphany, where after 2 years of work, where the committee collected data about which castes are backward, he wakes up and he says, you know what, I think it's not good to identify backwardness based on caste. And this has been extensively looked at by several scholars, including mostly by Mark Galanter. However, what many have not noted, that the wording he uses is actually, he starts giving the example of Muslims and Christians to arrive at this point of the dangers of using caste as a criteria. I'm out of time now, so I cannot get into the quotes, which are very interesting, but I'd just like to conclude with a few points. The denial of caste in Muslims in independent India has happened through a strange concoction of a few things. One is the Muslim elite projecting an idea of theoretical Islamic egalitarianism, to the secular state and intelligentsia wanting to not talk about or admit to caste in general. And three is the secular state's desire to protect the idea of a minority religion over looking at the most marginalized in the religion. This has very interesting implications about how minority politics could have affected the denial of rights of lower caste Muslims. I hope to explore this in my ongoing work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shireen. And now finally, we have Rupa, who is going to speak to us about the conversion question of the state and Hindu, and we can't hear you.
There we go.
Lovely.
Thank you very much to Srilata and Vignesh for organizing this and inviting me. Thank you, Kriti. It's wonderful to see you. And thank you so much to Jusmeet and Shireen, who have given us great papers. Thank you. So my paper is not, at the moment, I'm not really working on religion. So this is a paper that brings together a number of observations that I've made over the years, and which I hope will also say something about the current moment. Okay, so so my paper is called Conversion into and Out of Caste, and as you will see from the paper, I mean conversion to include a broad number of processes which are quite distinct. So the kinds of things I will be talking about will be quite different from, for instance, what Jusmeet has just described in his discussions of Sanskritization. Okay, historical accounts of Indian society across many regions demonstrate that prior to the early decades of the 20th century, no Hindu imagined him or herself to share any form of religious community with those from the so-called untouchable castes. Whatever religious practices such persons engaged in the isolation of their own ghettos was of no concern to the caste folk for whom they labored. Certainly no one imagined enforcing any kind of unity in these practices across caste lines, because the public demonstration of superior caste ranking required precisely caste people's exclusive access to markers of status, such as temples. But through a series of transformations in the institutions of the state, as well as by means of the concerted campaigns of nationalist elites, this condition was entirely reversed in a matter of decades by the time of India's independence. That is to say, in a short period from being indifferent to the religion of Dalits, Indian elites would insist that Dalits were in fact Hindu. Now, of course, this view did not simply become hegemonic overnight in Indian society. Evidence of the lingering remains of this pre-independence past, when Dalits were not considered Hindu, is to be found in numerous ethnographic accounts from all over post-colonial India. In Dalit ghettos, urban and rural, even through to the present day, one finds casual usage of the term Hindu to refer only to caste society. Among caste folk too, Hindu in everyday parlance has widely been contrasted to Dalit, SC, depressed caste, Harijan, or whatever other term of art is used. But this past is entirely erased in ways similar to what Shireen was talking about. It is entirely erased in official language, with particular consequences for the lives and livelihoods of Dalits. So consider that the very definition of the administrative category scheduled caste which would determine access to post-colonial forms of welfare distribution, would come to encode the official logic, identifying SCs as only those belonging to the religions defined as emerging from national soil, and thus excluding Christian and Muslim Dalits. The moral panics and political violence surrounding Dalit conversion in post-colonial India, from Ambedkar's public conversion to Meenakshipuram, to the intensified campaigns of the Hindu right in the present day, could only be conceptualized as conversion out of Hinduism because of what we may call this prior state-sponsored mass conversion, right? Which was accomplished through legal fiat, an official mass conversion of Dalits into Hinduism. At the same time, this definition of SC constitutes a state-sponsored disincentive to convert, right? So what little the state offers comes with the requirement that the recipient remain Hindu. So what understanding of religious identity and religious conversion does such a definition depend on? A very strange one, just like in the ways that Shireen was describing. State welfare, construed as a form of recompense for those suffering from caste oppression, is not extended to non-Hindu Dalits because it is alleged discrimination is a Hindu problem. Once Dalits have converted then, they ought to be treated just like caste folk. Now, to any scholar of India, this is a risible claim. In every part of India, there are Christian and Muslim Dalits who are subjected to just the same forms of domination and discrimination as their Hindu counterparts. Perpetrators, in other words, regularly flout the understanding of caste that the state prefers. They are not limited to exploiting and dominating only co-religionists, and yet with dogged insistence, it is this definition that has remained on the books. Finally, in 2003, there was even a national commission, the Mishra Commission, to consider whether Christian or Muslim Dalits required the same protections as Hindus. The assembled experts overwhelmingly agreed that they should, providing copious sociological evidence, again, no surprise to anyone who has studied caste society. But this commission, like all commissions that do not conform to a Hinduized picture of caste oppression in post-colonial India, has been entirely ignored, and the state, from the period of Congress dominance through to today's unapologetic Hindu majoritarianism, has defined Dalitness as a purely Hindu problem. The official Hinduization of Dalit identity did not only entail limiting access to welfare provisions like reservation to Hindus. It also has determined how anti-Dalit violence would be defined and adjudicated. Legal protection was extended from 1955 onwards in the form of the Untouchability Offences Act, and this was the principal legal tool that was supposed to punish and deter violent offences against Dalits. As has been amply demonstrated, the act was implemented, if at all, in the breach, and perpetrators were not punished and therefore not deterred with any regularity. But the Untouchability Offences Act is worth our attention today because it encoded violence and conflict in a language of Hindu prejudice. In its very name, the Untouchability Offences Act, first of all, its very name focuses on a form of ritual exclusion that is officially defined as unique to Hinduism. And historically, the act was meant to provide a national alternative to what were until then state-specific pieces of temple entry legislation. So the act, in its very framing, rendered caste a problem internal to the newly conceived Hindu majority community. Untouchability, as most of this audience will know, refers most directly to the fact that persons from these castes were and are treated as if their very touch is polluting, according to Hindu notions of ritual purity. It is for this reason, Orthodox caste Hindus will explain, that the areas in which they dwell must be kept apart from others. These doctrines of touch pollution have certainly been central to the experience of being a Dalit in India. But it is by no means self-evident either that this ritualized form of discrimination is what essentially defines Dalitness, nor that ritual discrimination adequately describes the varieties of subordination to which Dalits are subject. Indeed, even what is called ritual subordination has numerous entailments that spill into other realms of collective life. For instance, one not uncommon instigation for anti-Dalit violence is the attempt by Dalits to use a village's water resources. The violence that ensues could be described as an effect of the doctrine of touch pollution, and caste people might well explain their anger as arising from the pollution of their water. But this would be to entirely overlook what is also central here, the monopolization of water, a critical resource in an agrarian economy, quite literally a matter of life and death. Monopolizing critical agrarian resources ensures Dalit subordination in all spheres of social and political economic life. To reduce this kind of violence to being the result of ritual pollution is to accept as explanatory the emic vocabulary of the very dominant groups who enact it. Most importantly, of course, as I have argued elsewhere, discussion of the open secret of labor relations that rendered Dalits landless in most of India and intensified their vulnerability to the kinds of harms described in the Untouchability Act were scrupulously avoided in the framing of protective legislation. A condition of enforced landlessness and agrarian servitude marked by the monopolization of agrarian resources and a violent labor regime was redescribed in legislation as a condition marked first and foremost by prejudice lodged in the caste Hindu mind. State-sponsored Hinduization, to reiterate, first rendered Dalits Hindu, and then, through legislation like the Untouchability Offences Act, carefully delimited the widespread oppression and exploitation they faced to matters of irrational prejudice and hate. For the law implicitly relied on a view of caste as a matter of wrong ideas. This is why, for instance, the perpetrator's intention is so central to the act. Certain actions were explicitly prohibited under the Untouchability Offences Act, including such things as preventing a person from entering an eating establishment, using a house of public worship, and using the waters of tanks. But the law specifies not simply the action, but also the intention. The exclusions must proceed, quote, on the grounds of untouchability, end quote. The perpetrator, to be found unquestionably guilty, would have to explicitly invoke ritual impurity in some way. If a caste landlord attacked a Dalit laborer but refrained from calling him by a caste epithet, this would not violate the Untouchability Offences Act. This is not merely a hypothetical example. In one of the most brutal and widely publicized attacks on Dalits in post-colonial Tamil Nadu, which occurred in Virupuram in 1978, officials behind the scenes found that despite the murder of 12 Dalits and the torching of an enormous Dalit colony, the violence didn't fall under the scope of the act. In that instance, both the perpetrators' officials reasoned that both the perpetrators and the victims were townspeople, not villagers. This meant, according to them, that, quote, the traditional relations that give rise to practices of untouchability, end quote, did not obtain. So official secret discussions then reveal the emergence by the latter decades of the 20th century of a powerful administrative consensus that protected not victims but perpetrators by framing anti-Dalit violence as a mere vestige of an imagined Hindu village past rather than a recurrent practice rooted in relations of domination which were themselves reproduced with state sanction. Okay. How much more time do I have? Okay, great, I see you. Okay, so the most obvious solution to these unequal relations and the violence they occasioned, a solution that Dalit activists have called for consistently for over a century, is the redistribution of agricultural land. Most recently, one could point to Vignesh Rajahmani's demands for land when he first appeared on the national stage, demands that continue to be assiduously ignored by India's legislators. Legislation like the Untouchability Offences Act, therefore, confines official understandings of domination and oppression to ritual insult, while at the same time foreclosing other forms of government intervention. The redistribution of land to the landless poor, Dalit and otherwise, to an extent that would actually alter their relations with landed elites, so in other words, something more than the 3 cents you need for your house site, has not occurred anywhere in post-colonial India, even under left governments. In earlier research on Dalit conversion in colonial Tamil Nadu, I demonstrated that caste people objected to Dalit conversion to Christianity because it interfered with labor control, impinging on forms of domination they claimed as a matter of right. Their complaint, in other words, was vehemently not that some from among us were being weaned away from the flock illegitimately. The moral language of Hindu religious community, the idea of its vulnerability to religious proselytism, had not yet emerged. By contrast, in the post-colonial period, if we take the many state-level anti-conversion laws as illustrative, Dalit selves are construed as part of the national we, but as dependents. And indeed, the law explicitly assimilates Dalits to children and women, categories of citizen uniquely vulnerable to being lured away. Existing laws thus invite us to view conversion as violence against an organic Hindu community with a long history, and public attention is directed to whether or how converts have been lured. These laws, like the definition of SC discussed above, are most consequential not for the crimes they purport to isolate and prevent, but for the vision of Hindu unity they authoritatively champion, a process that long predates the current rise of Hindu majoritarianism. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rupa, for keeping to time. Almost to the second. Thank you. So that was all wonderful. Now I'm going to take a little bit of sounding from Srilata at this point. So are we taking questions straight away, or am I saying a couple of things first? So do I get the prerogative to ask my questions? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you can take maybe 10 minutes or so, and we do have some questions in the chat box.
Yeah, not as much, but I'll just. So that was all very fascinating. Thank you all very much. They seem to be very disparate papers, but actually they're quite similar in the sense that they come up with we constantly come up against that very same question: what then is caste, right? Because if can it be? Sorry, that is the alarms. That was I mean, Jusmeet, I really enjoyed your presentation. I could have, have several questions. I see from the question Q&A box, as well as the chat, you've got lots of questions for you. So I'm not going to take all the questions at this very moment. I quite like one of the people responding to you. I really like the distinction you made between Sanskritization, challenging Srinivas's use of Sanskritization as a sort of strategy for upward mobility, but as you said, it's actually something that the upwardly mobile do, right? And then because you're kind of you brought us your whole talk was kind of centered around understanding or trying to discuss what respect is. And I think I would like you to say a little bit more on what you think your respondents and the people you were speaking to, what they meant by respect, right? And what is it that they were, what kind of respect, from whom, by whom, and in the sense that there was, I could see that, and could they see the contradiction between, animal sacrifice and Sanskritization at the same time, and who was within the communities was certain kind of person doing the animal sacrifice and certain kinds of groups, painting pictures of Vishnu. And so, there are, so which gods, because are certain kinds of gods being, shunned away, put away from public view, etc. Because, yeah, and I can, bring in, this is something I can guess a lot of people who do this kind of work actually have had to deal with in their own research. So I'd quite like to hear what you have to say about, respect. Because anyway, so that's one this thing. But what for me was common between the between the three speakers was this idea that there is some kind, there's obviously this is an old problem with, in Indian sociology, anthropology, and politics of caste, is, where does the political economy of caste begin, and the ritual economy of caste end? So, and what is the relationship, if any, between these? Because if you say that this is all political economy, then you then have to ask yourself, well, yes, but then what makes caste? Because then deprivation and systematic deprivation and disadvantage is rife in many contexts, and and so what is caste about caste then? And I think that's the kind of another question that Rupa is asking, but also Shireen is grappling with, because I feel that how then do we understand what caste is if there is no ritual economy attached to it? By which I don't mean just that people marry within or people eat this, but it's also caste as in a particular frame of specifically put forth by say Dumont, is that that it is all encompassing, which means not just this world but the other world as well. So you're carrying the political economy of not just this life but several lives, and so so how do we kind of square that up when we are talking to the state and making the state listen to certain kinds of demands we want to base on, either in terms of respect in Jusmeet's case, or in terms of sheer deprivation. And then how? So there is certain kind. There's a purchase in the language of caste, because it in Indian society it is the currency of discrimination and differentiation. And then that's why it becomes a language of which to speak to the state, the redistributive state in particular. And so if you can, in the absence of the ritual economy, how then do you understand? How do you make a convincing case around caste? So I think that was really interesting. And Rupa, of course, I think it's the same. Similarly to you, my question would really be, where does the political economy, begin? And at that, and if we, even Vignesh Rajahmani, when he speaks about resources, his whole thing is also, his politics really takes off when he says we will refuse to pick up the carcasses. Mm-hmm. Right? So, and that's not just about, in my reading, it's not just about professional specializations and the Rajahmani system and all of that. It is about what Jusmeet is talking about, but it is about certain kind of respectability, which is completely tied in with ritual status. And that isn't just about the here in this world, it is also about the other world. And so just sort of opening this, and there's some really interesting questions in the chat box I've seen. I'll leave that to Srilata to ask. Thank you.
Thanks.
So anyone can, whoever wants to respond first.
Jusmeet, maybe?
All right. So I think that was the question I was dreading the most. If somebody asked me how I'm going to define respect, because I haven't defined respect yet. It's very complicated, because in the sense that it's the reference to the ghetto and outside the ghetto is very, very central to the definition of respect. And when I say when you are in the ghetto, it means you are stuck to a life of poverty and very low social mobility, and I mean low occupational economic mobility. When you are outside the ghetto, that's where things start changing. So I think when I will define respect, I have to take these two notions really into mind. But let me give you a very broad idea. So Oxford Dictionary defines respect as a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. So in this case, when we are referring to the ex-untouchable groups, I think respect is the absence of doubts that are constantly posed on your abilities, your qualities, or your achievements. So I think that's how right now I see respect, if it makes sort of sense. So it's the absence of stigma in daily interactions, right? But then you would ask me, but why are you bringing the case of ghettos and you know, when there is homogeneity over there, why then respect is so important there? And I think it has to do with the fact that the outside world is very much close to those who are stuck to what I call in my other works core ghettos. So the only way you can sort of feel powerful where you are living in your living environment is through doing these kinds of religious activities. So there's also a gender difference there. Males tend to do more the kind of sacrifices that I showed you. Women are doing another set of more sort of, you know, central Sanskritization practices there, right? So even within the ghetto, across gender lines, the practices would vary. So I argue that Sanskritization, the way it's been followed by the Dalits, is not for social mobility, but by the socially mobile. Because in fact, the first thing that people are really obsessed is about getting an education and getting a job. And I think, and I couldn't sort of complete my argument when I show you that triangle because of the paucity of time. That's what people are really, really obsessed about. And I have a paper on social once you have, let's say you have got education, you have got a good job, and you have enough money to get out of the ghetto and move to a Dalit enclave. What happens then? This is where you in fact start feeling stigma and discrimination much more, because this is where you leave the protection and comfort of your ghetto. And I'm not sort of here, I can't remember the word I was looking for. Anyway, so I mean, the idea is really that when you go out of you start feeling stigma and discrimination much more, because ghetto sort of bounds you from it despite all the problems it has. So, so I think when you go out, and in the case of the LIC officer that I evoked, it really coincided with the time when he gets out of the ghetto, right? His Sanskritization practices, like especially giving up meat. And he tells me later that we gave up eating meat, and we used to drink prasad alcohol, but we stopped even doing that sacrifice. And it really coincides when he comes sort of, you know, to the changes the residential location. So I think that's where I can respond for the timing, and I'll wait for the other rounds of questions.
Yeah, yeah, great. Shireen, do you want to come in at this point? You're mute. Yeah.
I really liked what you asked about, you know, where does the political economy of caste begin, and where does it end, and where does the ritual economy begin? And to be very honest, this is something that's very important to the way I'm going to do my further research, because like I'm trying to push for an understanding away from the sociological understanding to a structural understanding. And part of it is to say that, you know, one of the most obvious questions, and someone on the chat box just asked, doesn't this research face a lot of flack? And it does, because one of the first questions that is asked is, isn't caste among Muslims way less, you know, pervasive, rigid, as is it in it is in Hindus? And to be honest, the answer is we don't know. Perhaps yes, and perhaps no. But what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to assert, is trying to move away from it. It's almost as if it should not even matter if Muslims do not have caste practices, which they do. There is untouchability, there is enough evidence of all these things. But when we also move away from, you know, the ritual dimensions, then you can come and ask me what really is caste, what really is left of caste in here. And something really interesting happening, some interesting work that's happening in this forum is a lot of people are actually questioning the egalitarian Islam bit as well. So people are questioning the status of Sayyids in Arabic societies, and pointing out that they also have, a kind of theological, greatness. And I think Shafiullah Anis wrote a really good piece in Roundtable India recently, and he was tracing how, Sayyids are able to command a ritually higher position in Muslim society. And it becomes very interesting to kind of merge this to India when you say that, Muslims came from foreign countries at some point and got integrated into the Indian caste system. And then we say that lower caste Muslims converted from lower Hindu caste occupations, and the other Muslims are from these upper caste, are either Sayyid, Sheikh, Khan or Pathan. It becomes very interesting to see this merging of two worlds. And for one, I am not very comfortable yet to call what is happening in Arab countries and what is happening with Sayyids in countries other than India as caste. But there is something definitely where ritual does come into play. And this is perhaps one of the reasons why caste was able to integrate in India so well with Muslims. There is definitely something in the way Muslim societies are structured and the way Sayyids do get theological legitimacy with how it got merged into the Indian caste system so well. That's all I have to say.
Great. Yeah, just a suggestion that I think it's also that I guess in the case of these kinds of in the Muslim kinship structures are much more like descent based, right? They're much more descent centric. So in the sense it is all about the purity of the descent line, right? And so you trace your hierarchies based on descent rather than other kinds of, other than just ritual purity or pollution. So the marriage rules are very different. Yeah. So therefore, that whole ritual, the whole economy of caste and discrimination and differentiation plays out entirely differently. Yeah. Rupa, sorry, I was just an aside. Couldn't resist the anthropological number there.
Okay, thank you, Kriti, for these questions. And I guess I will try to pick up on this issue as well. So first of all, I would say that the idea of, let me say two things. So there's first the ontological question of political economy versus ritual economy. I don't think you can have an answer for that question across the caste system, right? So what I'm interested in is specifically the historical condition of Dalits who were almost to a number agrestic slaves. It makes sense to think of caste and class coinciding in that context. It doesn't always, right? Yeah. So it's again just a question of being able to specify your object and to not use words like caste, or the caste system. And, Shireen has talked about how that was used as basically a synonym for Hindu society, to not use that as the kind of portmanteau that it is used by the state and in a lot of social science. The second issue I think that's really important, which is also, I think, almost more important than the ontological question, is the kind of political blackmail that tends to emerge when we raise these questions, right? So you either, if you believe in class, or you don't, and it's and the offer to you is you choose one or the other. You can't have both. And this is a blackmail that I resist, because it is also about the way elites choose to divide up these things and choose to make certain issues political and other ones not. So of course, ritual economy is an important thing when it is focused on officially to the exclusion of the other things which are glaring, which are staring everyone in the face. Right? Then I think it becomes a political issue. So I think even phrasing the question of caste or race, for that matter, as ontological questions rather than as thinking about them as processes is a flawed place to start.
Great. Okay, thanks. So Srilata, do we want to go through the questions now in the box? So yeah.
Yes, I think we can start doing that. So there is quite a bit of interest in knowing sort of more empirical details from both Jusmeet and Shireen, and maybe we can start off with those and then slowly go into the more kind of broader conceptual discussions, cutting across all the presentations. Well, first of all, thank you to all three speakers and to you, Kriti, for really, really rich and engaging contributions. So for Jusmeet, there are questions about what you started your presentation with, about the use of the term ex-untouchables as opposed to Dalits, and you mentioned that some of your the people that you work with were not did not prefer being referred to as Dalits. So there are questions about why that is the case, and how do they, for example, differentiate between the idea of Dalithood and ex-untouchableness. So if you can speak a bit more to that. And Shireen, for you, there are questions about the regional diversity in the experience of caste amongst Muslims, and the diversity between Shia and Sunni communities. And then probably a difficult one, why are there Muslims joining the RSS, and what is their caste location, and how are they being convinced to do so? So maybe we can go first to Jasmeet and then to Shireen.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Srilata, for this question. So yes, why were the interlocutors offended? It has to do a lot with upward mobility, once again, either within your own family or somebody you know in your own caste that has reached that status. And once you have become upwardly mobile, you have bought a good house, you have a car, and then being called Dalit becomes offensive because it really sort of thrusts them back from where they're really trying to escape. So this is why it was very offensive. So in one of the cases that I really have in mind all the time, this person was not even upwardly mobile, but then he started giving me illustrious examples of people in the caste who have risen to fantastic positions. And it's true, they have become nuclear engineers, famous doctors, politicians, whatnot, even the president of India, for that matter. So, they really objected to that term. They refer to each other, and okay, so they refer, in fact, they use often the word caste is never pronounced also. They use the word samaj. So samaj is the word that I learned after some time, that if I had to ask, questions without offending anybody, either in upper caste or a lower caste or the lowest caste, is to use the word samaj. Everybody is happy with the term samaj. So they would say Regar Samaj, Balai Samaj, Meghvanshi Samaj, and so on and so forth. So that's what the packet of term people really use. And I think it's a very decent term in the sense that it really breaks down that verticality of caste hierarchy and makes it a more sort of a horizontal sort of a plane. So I employ the word Samaj also now.
Thank you, Jasmeet. That's really interesting. The word I encountered in a lot of my fieldwork was biradari, also where people constantly refer to themselves as a certain biradari, the caste name and then the biradari, and I would never actually, use the terminology of caste or jat or jati, but rather biradari.
So that would happen, for instance, in the Muslim neighborhoods. This is where biradari becomes more important.
Right. Thank you. Shireen, do you want to come in?
Sure. About region, I'm focusing on Uttar Pradesh and Bihar mostly because the Paswanda movement has been very strong there, and they're very interesting work on how things change during partition. So how the movement conference, which was conglomeration of the Weaver or Ansari caste, challenged Jinnah and the Muslim League, and Santosh Kumar Rai has really interesting work on how the Congress knew of this and did not use All India Movement Conference bait to basically question Jinnah. So there are letters between Jawaharlal Nehru and the leader of the Movement Conference, Abdul Qayyum Ansari, where Nehru says that, yes, I know there's caste in Muslims, but I don't want to talk about caste right now. Paraphrased, of course. So there's a lot of interesting work. There's a lot of interesting things to look in the region about what really changed with India's independence and how the Muslim became a minority. So that's a region I am looking at, but there are, of course, other backward caste movements happening across the country as well. One thing that I found very insightful is something in Madhya Pradesh, where instead of, so the Pasmanda movement, which has been rising since the 90s, has been mostly focusing on political representation and questions of political representation. But there's an organization in Madhya Pradesh which has been focusing on building educational institutes for Muslims. And I'm forgetting the number, but they have built a wide number of educational institutes. That's where they want to focus their energies in. So there is a wide variety of very different approaches to how OBC Muslims are responding post Mandal. The other question about, it was about the Muslims joining the RSS. I am not sure about that, but there's a very interesting work. Actually, it's going to be published next week by my person who I'm co-authoring a Caravan article with, Sharik Laliwala. He writes on what kind of Muslims join the BJP. And they are, he writes, they are Shia and Sunni Sayyids mostly. And many of them do so to get closer to power, so to get a presidentship of Hajj committees, Waqf boards, and it's really a concoction of power and privilege that plays into what kind of people are joining the BJP. That's what I have to say now.
Thank you, Shireen. I'm going to now take the liberty to kind of club together a bunch of questions that kind of speak to the same theme, which I know Jusmeet has touched upon a little bit, which is, what is respect and how do you, understand respect? But there are questions about, understanding respect in a historical context and, how do we understand respect or respectability as separate from dignity or self-respect, which are terms that are more commonly seen in Dalit politics, for example, in Dalit mobilization. And I was thinking if also Nilanjana has asked if seeking respect and searching for respect within a certain social context are separate things, and if you would make that conceptual differentiation. And I want to add to that the question of if we kind of invert gaze and look at the theorization of humiliation that comes from Gopal Guru and others, and think of humiliation as the sort of affective mechanism of caste power in society, then what does that help us to think about respect from a different standpoint, in terms of what does it practically mean and what does it affectively do, what work does it do? So yeah, if you want to speak to those, conceptual categories, Rupa, if you want to start, maybe.
I think since it relates more to the work of Jusmeet and Shireen, let them start, and I will
Sure.
chip in.
Sure. Jusmeet, sorry to put you in the spot again. I know you've been talking about this for a bit now, but if you want to, jump in again for some reflections.
I think these are very interesting questions, and they sort of demand much more theoretical thinking and sort of taking it to sort of, when I typed the word respect in Google Scholar, it took me to ethics, to Journal of Ethics, and I want to also see how it is sort of defined there, but I haven't done that bit for the time being, but it's certainly in the radar. Certainly, it has a historical context, and if you take Sanskritization as a good way to achieving respect, for instance, the case of Yadavs, right? They also start making similar claims that since we are closer to a work related to the cow, we can in fact claim a higher status that ways. So yes, there's certainly a historical context. Once again, I don't really understand what Nilanjan means by seeking respect and searching for respect. I think I kind of see both of them as very similar. Yes, I think need more time to think about it in detail.
Sure, thank you. Shireen, do you want to go next?
Can I please request you to kind of rephrase what you asked? I'm slightly lost.
I have a quick comment that could follow from Jusmeet's. I mean, it seemed like even in the data that you were presenting, the kinds of respect, the understanding of what respect is, and the forms of disrespect, humiliation, are very class specific, right? So if you are a poor laborer, Sanskritization might not work for you, right? But, and I think that's always been true. I mean, you know, when I've interviewed people who older Dalit leaders who, you know, today are often seen as merely Sanskritizing or, you know, not sort of being political enough. I mean, it's fascinating the way they imagined Sanskritization is so different from the way we think of it today, as a sort of emulative practice, right? And instead, it's a rejection of many things, right? The Sanskritization is a rejection.
Mm-hmm.
So that meaning is totally different than the person you're describing, the upwardly mobile person who is actually emulating.
Emulating,
right?
absolutely.
So there are very different. I mean, I think one needs to analytically distinguish what you know, what respect means to people in their social location. It's very different. You know, the kinds of discrimination that that people face in a university is very different from the kind you face as a wage laborer. You know, and these are, I think it's a little bit loose to talk about them all, or to not recognize the you know, the important distinctions, because they require very different strategy.
Absolutely. Can I respond to that?
Yes, please go ahead, Jusmeet.
Yeah, so in fact, you're right. You know, it is not Sanskritization, the way I've described, is not guaranteeing that you will not be discriminated. You know, it's not like, you know, when you are getting admitted to a university and you are allocated the SC hostels and you're feeling completely stigmatized, like, oh my God, everybody knows that I'm an SC. It's not going to help over there. But what it does is, it is more like what the economists refer to as conspicuous consumption. So they say, look, you can do it, I can do it too. Yes. Now I have the means to do it. So now I'm going to engage in Sanskritization and even adopt your gods. It's not so much to say, okay, I'm going to emulate the practices and then become a higher status of Kshatriya, Rajput, etc., and so on. And I think I'm aware of that. And this is why I briefly mentioned about the meso and the micro level. So I think the question of respect has to be distinguished into three levels, as I see it. A macro level, and I think, for instance, the social movements and, you know, making big legislative changes would fit in there. Then you have the meso strategies, and I think today what I was talking about were the meso, the middle ground strategies as a group. What do you do as a group when you know all of you are in the same position? And then you have the micro strategies. So for instance, English speaking, like, it has been like people have been obsessed about learning English in the right way. And this same, you know, person who celebrated this extravagant Janmashtami, he in fact told me once, I asked him, why doesn't he live outside the ghetto? And he told me, look, I don't speak English. The upper caste who live there, they speak English. And nobody does speak English, in fact, in Ulhajpur. And then he sends his kid to London to have a degree that he, in fact, now speaks English. So, you know, this is a very different kind of strategy, a micro strategy. So I think right now I'm focusing mostly on meso, but I think analytically, you know, I want to go towards more Michel Lamont's kinds of, you know, work of interactional, everyday sort of strategies.
Great. Can I just quickly come in there? Because what I sort of also wanted to ask of you and Rupa is actually the relationship between respect and get the ghetto, because you both talk of the ghetto quite a bit. And I was not quite sure, you know, what are we talking about here? And when you are talking about the ghetto, because there is an old-fashioned anthropological term of endogamy. So, you know, are we talking also to shift the discussion of caste to locality? So, you know, this is as opposed to kinship, which is what endogamy is. At the same time, the gods are not in the ghetto. The gods are outside. They're in Jwalaji. They're wherever. So, to what extent is the ghetto really a ghetto in that sense? And what is the relationship between that and respect?
Who goes first this time?
It's really up to you.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
I will just
Yeah,
jump in.
go ahead.
Yeah, so it depends on what you're talking about. When I use ghetto in the way that I was using it in the talk, I'm basically referring to the colony of the so-called colony, the Cheri in Tamil, less euphemistically. So it's a, you know, it's a settlement which is outside and contains within itself the temples as well, right? So it's not that the gods are outside. It really is a distinct.
In your case, in his case, there was the
yeah,
real gods were
this is an
outside.
urban, yeah, and of course in, you know, in urban contexts, people of all castes go to the, you know, the big temples. So that's not the issue, but I think that spatial differentiation, which as we now know from a lot of recent research, also obtains in urban locations, is central, right? So, I mean, if you just think about, you know, people talk about like these you know, Indian forms of politics, like the Dharna and all these things, but an equally common form, right, is to burn the Dalit ghetto. That is a thing that happens all over India. It works because it's separate.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are these forms of domination that require the spatial difference. Just
Okay, I can take up from there. So, so let me start with the former point, the latter point you made about gods are outside. It's not true. The principal god that they are dedicated to may be located outside, but you have smaller temples dedicated to these gods and goddesses within the ghetto. So every street would have some. And in fact, you know, for instance, the photograph I showed you of the sacrifice, that was already a kind of a small temple, and people would come because it's a respected family because they know how to do the rituals, right? And so on.
No, it's a difference between temples and gods. So you can have temples anywhere. God, the home of the god is elsewhere, right? So Kuldevi is in the hills. She is not.
Yes.
She's not. You know, so that's why it's about also. So I'm actually encouraging you to use Jusmeet a little bit to think about how this is also about being outcasted. So you've been asked to leave the mother's home and go away and into this sort of, you've been sort of put away into this, put aside or something. You know, you're not no longer home in that sense. If your lineage or your Kuldevi is in Himachal and you are in Rajasthan, yes, you are making a spatial claim as well to somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a
beyond
good point.
The ghetto. That's what I was trying to
like
think about. Yeah.
To sort of think about it in a more theological term. What does it mean? Because if you are performing a sacrifice, the sacrifice is performed to that goddess, and that goddess, no matter where she's located, the speciality of the sacrifice is there. So would that mean that sacrifice is not even reaching there? And I'm not sure. So I think I need to think theologically, sort of, you know, how is it discussed in Hindu theological terms about that.
Yeah. Okay.
But for me, ghetto is different from the way. Okay, I think the way Rupa is discussing ghetto is this outcast colony in a village, right? We all know it's outside there. This is not happening in cities. They are not outside there. They are within the city. They can be very, very close to you. But the spatial segregation is happening in such minute ways that there is this whole invisibilization of where the Dalits are living in the city. And I think I have a paper on that, and I'm working on it to get it out very soon. So for me, the ghetto is a marker of your caste identity. Nobody's asking in the city, what is your samaj now, so openly, what is your jat, and so on. People ask, where do you live? And once you know where do you live, with a 95% probability, you can tell which caste this person is from. And if you can't tell the caste, you can say which caste group is this person from. So you stigmatize those areas. And Robert Sampson's work is fascinating about these stigmatized neighborhoods. And all the Dalit ghettos, and I very specifically define it in my work, are stigmatized. Then secondly, these ghettos are, in fact, when I say it's a marker of your caste identity, if you just pick up the lists, that your municipal government can provide you anywhere in India, and check where the Dalits are living, you'd be surprised to find that most of the names of the ghettos are the names of the caste.
Yeah.
So Kanjars are living in Kanjar Basti, Regars are living in Regar Basti, Mochis are living in Mochi Basti. So there is no way to escape. And so in cities, we have specialized caste to a very, very pernicious extent through making of these ghettos. And they're very different from the way we talk about it, in especially referring to the rural sociology of India. I think I can stop there.
If I can just come in here from a very different angle, but talking about caste and spatialization, it really also, there's recent work about how Hindu-Muslim riots and really affect the lower caste Muslims because of the way the places are structured. So Khalid Ansari writes that what you think of as a Hindu-Muslim riot is actually the lower caste Muslims' huts being burned, because spatially, they are the most vulnerable. They are living in places which are the easiest to burn. So they are identified as Muslims only at the time of riot, as because Ambedkar has also famously said. So yeah, that's really something where the creation of a Hindu and Muslim happens. And I think the previous panel of this, where a speaker was also talking about how Dalit and Muslim colonies are often found together, and but what you actually mean by that is lower caste Muslims and Dalits, are found together, and it also affects their vulnerabilities to religious violence specifically.
Thank you so much to all three of you. Yeah, I think I'm completely in agreement that the level of segregation, caste-based segregation in urban areas is somehow under-documented and under-recorded, but just very, very clearly mapped in public consciousness. And I agree with you, Jusmeet, when you say that in the city, if you're asked where do you live, it is very much a placeholder for what is your caste, or roughly being able to map you onto the caste scheme of that area. We have some questions about, and this is both for Shireen and for Rupa, I think. We have questions about how do you make sense of violence perpetrated by dominant Dalit groups on non-dominant Dalit groups, and how does the state intervene into that or make sense of that? Rupa, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I don't have research to back this up, but it seems to me that if there's a social pattern of demonstrating your superiority through violent control, why wouldn't a newly dominant group take up that practice? Why would the dominant Dalits have to be exempt? It seems like that's the, if that appears to you as the means to demonstrate dominance, and you wish to do that, I mean, that's what cultural repertoires are. It's sad that it's interesting. I think it's a mark of the distinctiveness to the extent that it exists of Dalit self-understanding, that it doesn't happen more often.
Shireen?
I don't have.
I actually
thank you.
don't have anything to add at all. It's not something I can comment on.
Okay, Well, sure. If I can make a sort of a pivot into a different kind of conceptual question, and Shireen, you touched upon this a bit in one of your previous responses. How useful do you think, like politically, also analytically, how useful is it to extend the vocabulary of caste to understand, forms of differentiation and discrimination in societies beyond South Asia? So you talked a little bit about Arabic societies, and recently, I think Suraj Yengre has started to, talk about caste in Eastern African context, for example. And Kriti earlier on mentioned how Isabel Wilkerson talks about race through the, the vocabulary of caste, if you will. So what are your thoughts on using caste as an analytic in that way, and what work does it do for us? Shireen, do you want to start maybe, since you touched upon it a bit?
I'm not sure I have more to add on what I said. I did say that I am not completely comfortable with, I am not comfortable with using caste to explain what happens in other societies yet. Of course, there's several forms of differentiation, some of which might even involve ritual purity in the similar senses, but I think there is something very specific to the way we use caste in India, which I do not see reason yet to start using. I get it as a political, I get it as, yeah, as a political hack, but I don't see why, yeah, I wouldn't do it. I don't know why we need to use the concept of caste to describe other societies.
Sure. Rupa, would you like to weigh in on that?
I think I have very different view, which is that just as, I was talking about, and Shireen, talking about sort of national discourses that, define Islam in a particular way as egalitarian and caste-free, define Hinduism as the source of caste, et cetera, et cetera. All these forms of authoritative definition invite us, in a sense, to see caste as unique to India. And I think that's a really untenable position when you look at the evidence around the world, right? So if you think about things that we think of as most, most central and most sort of oriental about caste, like untouchability, you find these practices in the American South. There were people who were afraid to have Black children swim in the swimming pool because it would pollute it, right? I mean, this is and the kind of and also I think the thing that is left out when we talk abstractly about whether we ought to compare caste and race and all these things, ethnicity, is that it imagines the question exists outside of modern nation states, which it doesn't. And so these states have very similar strategies for how they organize people in these categories, and the kinds of patterns that you can see, whether it's in, different measures of welfare or different measures of housing, all these kinds of common frameworks for governance. I think demand that we should look across beyond the Indian context, absolutely, and should just, I personally see caste as something that's very analogous to all these other processes, and consider it the work of the social scientists to talk about exactly what is specific without making a claim that the category itself is, untouchable, if you will.
Yeah, thank you, Rupa. I'm glad you brought up the example of the swimming pool, because that's something that also really stuck with me when I read about, the desegregation movement. And, even after they had managed to desegregate schools and restaurants, somehow swimming pools remained this kind of special place that needed, a special arrangement for desegregation to actually work, because the kind of like bodily intimacy that it involves, and it really then pushes us to think about the essence of caste, as you said, and again brings me back to thinking about the affective politics of it, the central question of how it makes you feel, a caste experience as structures of feeling. And there's a lot to think through there, I think, in a global setting. So thank you for that. Jasmeet, would you want to weigh in on this in any way? I mean, it's perhaps completely outside of your domain of research, but I was thinking, working in Jerusalem, being based in Jerusalem, and talking about segregation, there's a lot going on there. If you feel comfortable, if you would want to, draw any parallels or comment on that at all, then we would be very happy to hear about that.
Um, so that's always a very dangerous game to play when you're sitting here. Okay. So in fact, I'm teaching a course right now to students at the Hebrew University on caste. So I teach them about caste and I ask them to do presentations using caste as a theoretical tool to apply on any other non-South Asian society. And I've got some fascinating works and the kind of comparison that people make. So I'll give you one example that one of my students want to do. She wants to work in a big supermarket, a kind of a wholesale place, but it's also used by the poorer ultra-Orthodox Haredi communities, but also the poorer Arabs. And she wants to go and study what is happening there in terms of who's doing what job, in terms of division of labor, and then sort of push it into a scale of hierarchy. And what she told me was fascinating, as something which was like, it is so divided along that purity pollution lines as we are so aware of. So I'm really looking forward to that kind of stuff. So I think it does make sense to students to do this kind of work elsewhere. I do know that even in France, there was a community that was living until, I think, the beginning of 20th century called les Cagots, C-A-G-O-T-S, les Cagots. And les Cagots were really the untouchables of the central, and I think if I'm not mistaken, the eastern central part of France. And they had tucked, like, at the foot of a duck on their body so that they could be distinguished. And they were pushed to do the works of a carpenter or an iron worker. So again, if you sort of take that example, not of France as a caste system, but that there is an existence of untouchability practice and a group of untouchables, I think I do agree. It is not, caste system is not bound to only South Asia. I think we need to use it as a lens to sort of check other societies.
Thanks. I think we're getting sort of conflicting feedback in the chat. So we have Meena Thanda saying, I agree with Rupa on the importance of analogously understanding caste in a global framework. But we also have an anonymous attendee who said that if we kind of extend the idea of caste as a universal or global thing, then it just becomes a bad thing that everyone does, and we take the kind of political sting out of it in critiquing it as a situated experience and a situated politics of it in South Asia. So I guess there's quite a bit to be debated there. Kriti, did you want to come in with any reflections at this point? We are coming almost to the end of time.
Yeah, Rupa wanted to say something to that.
Oh, I just, is that question visible to us? The one you were mentioning?
It's in the Q&A, if I'm not wrong.
It's in the Q&A. Okay, that's because I hadn't seen that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I understand, the importance of what the person is saying about wanting to maintain specificity, except that I think political action requires solidarity, not specificity, right? And if you want people to take something seriously in India, I think saying that it's only Indian is just bad strategy. And it's also, I think, empirically not true. But I think the most important thing is that I think the idea that uniqueness is what you need for politics is, I mean, I don't really understand. So maybe the person could say more about why they think preserving the specificity is important to politics.
We'll wait to see.
Yeah.
Kriti, go
Can I
ahead.
say something to that? It's so I don't think when I say that there is something specific to caste, I want to preserve the specificity, or that this is not a, this is about a particular kind of politics. But I think the political question and the anthropological question around caste are two different things.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think to be able to do one well, you have to understand both sides, right? So you can't understand, the anthropological question without understanding its politics. Of course not. But I also feel till you wouldn't understand what is specific to caste as a system of discrimination, as opposed to race as a system of discrimination, you wouldn't be able to do your politics well either, because you wouldn't really know what to hit.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I see them as different projects, absolutely. So obviously, an anthropologist or a historian is not necessarily an activist, but I don't see them as necessarily in conflict, right? So I think a proper understanding of both would lead to the right politics, actually. I don't see them as necessarily having to be compromised with, because it seems like, it's only, I am convinced by the sociological facts that a political solidarity is possible, and doesn't occlude any important data.
Yeah, I think I agree. I have no disagreement with what you're saying, but I think there is something which is distinctly anthropological in one's as a form of inquiry that isn't exhausted by the sociological understanding. So by which I mean, what percentage of people are X, or what is, that's not what I mean. So I'm talking really about, symbolic structures and all of that only, and that is also important to understand, to get, to understand what is specifically caste about caste. That's it. And that's all I was saying.
No, absolutely.
I'm reminded here, sorry, go ahead, Rupa. I'll come
no, please, Srilata.
Oh, I was just saying that I'm reminded here of Malini Ranganathan's work. She was on our panel last time, and she talks about not wanting to compare caste and race, but to think about caste and racialization and casteization, and the process of racialization, and how we can either learn from that or act in solidarity with the experience of racialization, rather than wanting to conflate race and caste, or collapse one or the other into the other. Okay, I think we have a few questions that we haven't really tackled, and maybe some of you would want to take that up. We have a question about randomized control trials, and if you think that would be a helpful tool to act against caste. And we also have a question about the recent, love jihad legislations, and the UP government stance on it. And if you want to say something as sort of final words on that before we close the session today, any of you? Shireen, since you're working in UP, do you want to weigh in with a bit of rage? Anything that you want to express? Feel free to vent.
I don't really have to say anything from the caste perspective. As a Muslim woman, it feels very interesting, like how I cannot do love jihad. So I really want to be empowered enough to do it, but somehow the Muslim women can only be won over, but cannot be the perpetrator. So it's a very interesting position to be in. I don't have anything to say about randomized control trials. I don't think that works at all. Anyone else?
Thank you, Shireen. Do any of the others want to add to that?
I can always add something.
Go for it.
I mean, I was just going to say that what's interesting to me about, so from the perspective of Tamil Nadu, right, the kinds of, the new kinds of violence that are happening around intercaste marriage, I mean, they are distinctive from the kinds of caste violence of, say, 30 years ago. And this is a really interesting problem, and also goes back to the question of how we think about comparison, because it reminds us that both caste and race are not things that you can either decide, that you decide once and for all, they're comparable, they're historically changing, right? So we need to look at what kinds of processes are happening in one place, what kinds of processes are happening in the other place, and figure out whether the comparison makes sense. It's not something that we should come to a priori, I feel. And I think, yeah, and I think that one of the problems with the ways that caste is understood by the Indian state and a lot of ordinary people is precisely as a kind of ahistorical problem, that inheres in consciousness, which is also how the state sees it. So, so love jihad is a very, it's a very horrible, but also very interesting thing that's happening where something is really shifting. And I'm looking forward to reading people's work about it, so.
Thank you. Jusmeet, would you like to come in with any final contributions?
No, I think Rupa has said it all.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We do have 5 minutes left. I actually wanted to just kind of flag something that I originally, when I thought of this panel, I thought it would probably, be one of the central themes, and then it ended up not being, which is absolutely fine, but maybe something that we can, take up in future conversations, which is about, Navayana Buddhism. And, there's sort of this, I see this kind of discourse that if you are a real Dalit, if you want to really, have Dalit politics, good politics as a Dalit, then you must convert to Buddhism, and otherwise, it's just like not pure enough. And there's also a lot of kind of, but Ambedkar did not say that, or, but Ambedkar said there's ghettos, but Ambedkar said race and caste are separate. And I just feel like, what is the value in this kind of purity politics? If I can use that term here very cautiously. So if you want to, just kind of say little, thoughts on that, and something that we can, take on afterwards, maybe for future panels and 2.0 of this panel, whenever the chance presents itself. Jusmeet,
Well,
go ahead.
I can. So Buddhism did appear, but as a very, very sort of liminal strategy. In fact, it's very interesting because I think I stick to my conclusion of the talk about the ex-untouchables and Ulajpur being very pragmatic about what they are doing. So they accept the affirmative action. So if I put it in a linear way, the mythological narrative happens, affirmative action gets kicked in, new people get good jobs and so on. And once they retire, this is when they convert to Buddhism. Because if they would before, then they would lose those material benefits. So I met a lot of sort of retired people who would start converting to Buddhism and then start talking about Ambedkar. So it's not that Ambedkar is totally lost from the scene, but again, the usage is very, very pragmatic. In my personal research about all the things that I've discussed about the purity politics, I think I'm just sticking to a simple norm. See what is happening in your field, how people are referring to it, how people are relating to each other, what is untouchability within untouchability. And I think as long as I stick to that, I think I feel like I'm in a safe place and I don't have to make very difficult claims about if this is right or not right or wrong and so on. So yeah, that's what I think I would like to add.
Thank you, Jusmeet. Rupa, Shireen, any final thoughts?
I have nothing to add, Rupa, perhaps.
Just to say, Srilata, that I empathize with that impulse to kind of reject policing of different kinds. But just to say that the context in which Ambedkar is upheld is the context in India in which everyone upholds someone. Every caste has somebody to uphold. Every political movement upholds people. It's all about leader-centric thinking, and so I wouldn't say that that's unique to any kind of Dalit politics or anything like that.
Great. I think we have come to the end of the session today. I just want to take a minute to say thank you to the speakers, of course, for your excellent contributions and very, very thought-provoking discussion afterwards. And I wish you all the very best with your work, Shireen and Jusmeet, especially with your doctoral research and going forward, and hope to keep up with Rupa's work as well going forward. A very big thank you to Kriti for chairing the session today, and also for your thoughtful comments and questions and for steering the discussion. Last but not the least, I have to say thank you to Vignesh, who is like the behind the scenes, master of ceremonies who makes everything possible, despite himself being in Chennai in the eye of the cyclone, which I hope will not touch you. And I hope all of you stay safe and healthy in these difficult times. Thank you to our audience for joining us, for taking the time from across time zones, for your interesting and thought-provoking questions. Please do keep track of our upcoming events and listen to our podcast and send us your feedback. We look forward to hearing from all of you. And it's been a really, really engaging evening here in London for me, and I hope for you as well, everywhere that you are, that you're joining us from. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you so
Srilata.
much,
Good to
Well,
Srilata.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye. Great
Kriti. Thank you,
conversation. Speak
Vignesh.
soon. Yeah, bye.
Could be.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.